All right. Thank you, Johnny, for recording.
No problem.
Good. Yeah. So, just to summarize so far, right? So we'll record the next 45 minutes of this. Andy should be joining us soon. I don't know, Vaslav, if you're able to hear us yet. No, he's dropping and going back in. So he's been having some trouble with it. But yeah, summary before the recording was that on the IBM side, so that's Adrian, Pedro, myself, and John, is what we were really trying to sort out is how do we take the current Grio system as it's deployed and for managing on the Mexico system, the Chilean system, and have that back to the open source system through a Kubernetes cluster that we're determining architecture for, as well as understanding how to replicate it around the world for different data centers as needed. And Andy, good timing. We just started the recording.
Hi, sorry folks, I had something which ran over. I'm really sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah.
We have some
Perfect timing, Andy.
Happy New Year to you all.
Yeah, and Vaslav.
So we were going to talk about infrastructure. We were going to talk about the dashboard, the provisioning app, the firmware, the sensor itself. And we wanted you to sort of give us so a little bit of an update on what's happening with the Puerto Rico Science Trust and the Seismic Authority.
Okay, I'm happy to do. Yeah, so I'm sorry to interrupt in the middle of everything. I guess because this hour always finishes sooner than we expect it to. So I guess rather than deep diving into any of the specifics, it's good to outline these things. And if we start with the PR of the Puerto Rico, that seems to have a lot of momentum at the moment. So the idea there is I think it's going to be our first real shot at proving the whole system out. You know, like OpenEEW is such a collection of different technologies and people and everything. But I'm very hopeful, and I think VacLab also shares that on the seismology front. If you're around, he joined me in a recent call. I'm very hopeful that this is going to prove things out for us. So the idea of Puerto Rico is that thanks to IBM's grant, we can afford to buy 40, I can't remember the number, 40 or 50, I don't remember what it was, potentially more sensors. And then we have the Seismological Agency, which is the equivalent of the USGS, you would assume, who are very receptive to us, which is a first because we've engaged these sort of people in many countries around the world, and we've never had any luck. But for some reason, I think mostly because of Diego, who's on our team, he has a very good relationship with these people, or at least they respect his work. So anyway, they're allowing us sites to deploy sensors, and then the Puerto Rico Science Trust, in conjunction with the Clinton Global Initiative, are giving us additional sites and support, and even some funding for additional sensors potentially. So we've got a lot on our plate, and I think it's going to be quite straightforward when everything's ready on our end. When us as a team decide, everyone here decides that we're ready to go, we just ship the sensors to Puerto Rico and we get the data. But it really is a decision which we have to decide on. When will we be comfortable? When is the MVP done? When do we decide it's all okay? And that's part of what I wanted to discuss today. The roadmap. What is the components that we feel are critical to get to this junction? And I think Puerto Rico is the perfect, milestone for us in terms of it's a thing that we should be working towards, because the other thing is this idea of having citizen scientists. But if you think about it, I think it's going to take months or years before we have enough citizen scientist density to get really good EEWs. So in many ways, Puerto Rico is going to get us there a lot faster as a proof of concept. But yeah, so in terms of the roadmap, I don't know if you guys, what you've already been discussing, but I feel that there are several key components, and I don't know if John, you want to talk about those?
Let's talk about a couple of pieces, right? The hardware itself. My understanding is you've got a production run underway. And that's good. We have the minimum viable product of a provisioning app and of the firmware. The provisioning app still kind of going through there's one path through that works. It's a golden path that works through the provisioning app. It doesn't yet integrate any of the login step, and that was sort of something we have to get James and Ryan together, hopefully with myself and possibly Pedro, to talk about how to tie the login step into the provisioning and the cloud. So you can set up your app, register your device, register the user, and so that gives us information for the dashboards. The provisioning app sends the MAC address. I'm sorry, it sends the SSID and the password of your Wi-Fi to the device. Device starts, gets connected, starts to register itself, and then record data. It doesn't send data every second to the cloud any longer. What it does is it just listens for 10 seconds of data, and then you can manually turn it on or turn it off and send the 10 seconds of data if there's an alert. So that'll reduce our the amount of data we need to send and store in the cloud. The next step after, so then we've got a couple of endpoints in the cloud. Those are running in our IBM Cloud Grio account, and it's a Node.js, Node-RED, Cloud Foundry app. There's a couple of endpoints that do the registration, stores some data in CloudInt.
I'm happy with that, right? That's working really well, I think.
I think that piece sort of, well, I mean, other than it might move into a kube cluster, that piece sort of is, pretty stable at this point. And we've got a couple of small little dashboards, not intended to be full-on dashboards, just to prove out the hardware, right? Send an alert down to the board that says, test the earthquake alert, control the device itself. Those are just like test harnesses, not intended to be our end production dashboard experience. We've got a cloud and database that's sort of being populated. I think we've got six devices registered into it now. That's kind of clever. We have to decide where to store the data and what format we want to store when there's actually an alert. We want to store the data because we want to play that back into the dashboard and then actually do the alerting side of it. So it's something that Vaclav and I need to talk about. What format do we want to store the data? What's the indexing that we are interested in? The next step after that is to actually move it sort of into that production world, where that's what Daniel started with, is when we go live with our PR Caribbean network, we sort of want to have an infrastructure set up for them. And that's why we have Endrin here to help us set up the infrastructure. That's going to be the next big migration step, because it would move us, or today we're using Watson IoT platform, and in the future we would actually run an MQTT broker in our cluster. It would just be bespoke for that.
Can I pose a question, John? Sorry to interrupt. Can I pose a question? Yeah. And I wonder whether, because we've had a confusion in the past about the overall system and in sub networks. I mean, does it make sense, if people here are interested, that we sort of really focus on the Puerto Rico network as an example, which can then be replicated in other places? It takes away all the complication of multiple data centers and everything else. And just if we get this right, then the next step would be to do it in other places.
Yeah, quite possibly. And we could use the endpoint to sort devices if we really needed to.
Yeah.
Okay. And where would do you want to set that up, Andy, in your cloud account as the place for it, or were you thinking to put it elsewhere in a different area?
Well, I'm happy to host it. I think Puerto Rico, we need to also have this conversation with the authorities there, right? Because they're going to want some ownership of this. So I guess if we can put that question on hold, I'd love to. Let's write an email together. I'll copy you, and we'll ask the Science Trust and the seismology folks, how they want to handle the hosting option.
Okay.
What did you mean by why they'd want a part of ownership of this. Just to be curious.
Well, they all feel very excited about it, and I think the worst thing, like in my years of working in development projects in other countries, the worst thing you can do is fly into a country and build them something and not give them the keys to it. And also there's many advantages to having people partner with you locally. Is they're the ones who are going to keep it running years after we've gone. So for us to just try and do everything is a mistake, and optically it's a mistake as well. You do want people to feel like this is their system, and the benefits will outweigh anything else. I mean, ultimately, we want local developers to engage with this and build additional apps to reach more people, and schools to sort of sign up and get themselves involved. So the ownership of it might be that we host it, but that they have absolute access to everything, or might be that they host it and give us access and we set it up for them. And I think all of us are sort of ambivalent about which, who owns what, but we just want it to feel like it's a Puerto Rico system.
Yeah, and because of that, right? So and Johnny, that doesn't mean the open source project itself that they own it. What it is just the instance for Puerto Rico. I don't know if you. But yeah. So I would say, so basically, if we understand what the architecture should look like, what we think is going to work as the first version for Puerto Rico, we need to figure out the architecture, how big it needs to be. And I think what we can do is we can host it in the call for code IBM developer account, because we have full control over the costs. So it wouldn't be an issue for anybody else. We can absorb those as IBM. And then we can also grant the resource groups and the access to folks who need it at the cloud level. But if there's things that are above at like the app ID, those are also things that we can segment from the underlying resources. So I think what we would need to do is just, understand the architecture of what would be needed to support, for example, 40 devices in Puerto Rico, understand kind of our message storage and capacity needs, understand the architecture that we want to run, and then understand what sort of folks need access to what, so we make sure they do have that, and that there's also a linkage to the underlying open source project. So as changes happen there, they get fed in to that system effectively, and then it becomes the test bed for other locations. So yeah, we're willing to host it. We've got the place for it, and we've got a way to cover the cost of the clusters, the Kubernetes clusters, and that gives us more freedom about experimentation versus worrying about costs, at least to start with this.
Great. Yeah, and I do want to iterate how exciting this is, but if you think about EEWs in the world, there's only a couple. And for us to sort of be providing a national EEW, even if it's just an experiment at this stage, is potentially incredible. This really hasn't been done anywhere else. So
yeah, and just one caveat is, we just got to make sure they're aware of the reliability requirements and any sort of legal aspects of it. And that's something we'll need to take back to our folks too. But if we have at least buy-in, hey, this is a prototype version of, this is how it runs.
Yeah, it's a prototype.
Yeah. Then as long as that's all clear, I think that's just the most important.
I think, well, the conversation we had of the seismic, so he was actually a bit skeptical, correctly, with the seismic director of the institute, Dr. Huerfano. He was concerned because we're not the first people who've come to him with this idea. There are others who have said this to him, and he said, the utility of an EEW is really dependent on a number of factors, and Puerto Rico might not be the best candidate. And we agree with him. The issue of Puerto Rico is there are some earthquakes that will happen too close to the population centers, so there won't be enough time to give them a proper warning, maybe just a couple of seconds. And so this is all true. And I think we responded by saying, there's no magic bullet. There's no perfect system. You're never going to get every alert all of the time, but it's better than nothing. I know that sounds a bit awful after all, better than nothing, but it's the truth of any EW. You will never get all the alerts all of the time. So I think what we're providing will have utility, to a large percent of the earthquakes. But yeah, you're right, Daniel. We have to caveat everything that we do there and manage expectations.
It's indeed very exciting to be part of this. It's very cool, everything. It's the first big thing that I'm actually part of, which is significant in my opinion. Other than, of course, my work, which I also very much like.
Well, great. We're lucky to have you, Johnny. I think this is, it's quite nice to have a sort of something tangible coming out of this in the next few months, rather than working on a very abstract concept with citizen scientists that could take years to come to fruition.
Yeah.
So I think in that respect, this is a good opportunity for us. So just going back to the components, then I think John mentioned most of them. One of them, I think, Vaclav, maybe you might want to say something to, is the sort of detection, and you know, in many ways, this is going in parallel, because when the data comes into the system via the MQTT broker, you know, on the one hand, we're visualizing it and we're storing some of it and we're etc. But on the other hand, we're instantly, well, I don't know, Vaclav, if you want to explain it, but we have to do the whole characterization detection. How do you do the different steps in your mind? You're on mute, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So there are pretty much 4 steps in earthquake characterization. So it's detection. So when it comes to the station, we need to be able to detect that the earthquake happened. Then we need to calculate what the magnitude was or what the strength of the station was. And then we need to associate these detections together. So we need to somehow find out whether all those detections belong to one event or not, whether it's just a few smaller earthquakes or whether it's one large earthquake or whether it's just like a random noise that arrived at a few stations at the same time. And that's going to happen because we're going to have quite large networks. So it's going to happen that we're going to have few detections at the same time, and still doesn't mean that it's an earthquake. And then we need a location technique that will approximately locate where the epicenter is. And based on these 4 things, then we can predict what the amplitude of the shaking is going to be at some site somewhere else. So yeah, those are the components that I'm working on. Yeah.
And then once you know, once we've got an earthquake, which we're confident about, or the system is confident about, and then we issue alerts. I think this is what's missing out of our all of our meetings so far is the alerting. You know, how are we going to handle this? And is there some sort of API that we're going to allow developers to use, or an XML feed, or is there going to be XML feed is actually what Shake Alert use, I think. Or is there going to be sample apps that we create, which people just download? Is there going to be IoT devices which people can install in their homes and schools and businesses? You know, so I've got many questions, and I don't know if anyone here has any thoughts about this. Whether we should, what's the simplest thing we can start with? Is it an example app, or is it just a feed that people can subscribe to?
Well, one thing that we explored a bit a while back was Discord, but as we previously discussed, this is not in any way, shape, or form an option. Largely because I don't think that they want the liability, because the uptime of Discord isn't fantastic, which means that if they happen to go down while an alert is supposed to go off, then we're screwed and we can't deliver the alert. 1, 2, there's the rate limits set in place are too high for an actual alert system. In fact, any rate limit system that even is super generous will not allow such a thing to happen. So on Discord, it's not an option, sadly.
Okay, that makes sense. One idea, guys, is that I remember going to a meeting in California about 4 years ago for Shake Alert, which is the US EEW, and they were doing something which I thought was quite clever. They were sort of creating a public-private partnership, and I think the thinking was that we are infrastructure builders, but that the last mile, the way we get to the users, is something that is quite expensive, you know, and actually changes a lot. So, you know, in terms of, you know, having push notification subscriptions, or having all these different types of, you know, radio broadcasts, whatever. So they invited people to come and do that for them. I wonder if maybe that's a smarter way. We just have a feed and we just invite people to do those different options for us.
I would say that it is a good idea. I think that is actually quite hard, not maybe in terms of technical difficulty, but also from the point of like social side, because I think the delivery of the alert is a very important phase that may work differently in different places around the world, and because the society works slightly differently and people are used to different channels, and I think maybe like utilizing local resources for this or leaving this on somebody else, either like, I don't know, in case like Nepal, maybe leaving on some governmental or non-governmental organizations that have been working in there for a while and have deeper understanding of the place and how people would like to receive those alerts. I think that would make sense from my perspective. I think that yeah, it might be maybe like a wider issue than just the technical issue of delivering the alert, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right, and also because every country has different guidance for what to do in earthquakes. So we don't want to get into a position where we have a uniform, because you often in an alerting app tell people what they should be doing as well, and we might be stepping out of our boundaries if we start doing that.
From a technical perspective, would that mean creating something like a server that's running in the cloud that basically you just tap into like an API and we send out alerts and people can build whatever their own devices, whether it's on their phone or loudspeakers or whatever that connect into that?
Yeah, I think so. How feasible is that, Ryan?
Oh, I mean, very feasible. I mean, it would, I think the main concern with that would be speed. I mean, obviously reliability, but speed is paramount. I mean, cloud infrastructure gives the capability to be able to distribute, code to a lot of different availability zones or data centers or whatnot. So, that's I think it's more of like a cloud infrastructure question, because the code itself would be fairly straightforward. Just a question of trying to get that alert out in the fastest way possible.
There is a format which called CAP, C-A-P, which is sort of a universal. I know that we had some guy on our, I forgot his name, who was on about CAP a lot, but CAP is a sort of standard for sending out emergency alerts. It's like a JSON format almost, but it contains a couple of fields in terms of location and etc. So, potentially if there was some way we could just be broadcasting this feed with CAP standard, then people would know what to do with it, and then of course the last bit is that we can give some guidance. If you're creating an app, you might want to do this if you're going to determine your distance to the epicenter, and because that helps determine intensity of shaking. So
yeah, but an immediate problem that I think about is what if someone using their cell phone, for example, happens to not have the GPS on? Like, I'm not sure how exactly it works. Maybe we can access the GPS to calculate distance from the epicenter without it being on, but if not, then we need to remind the user to constantly, just like the Corona Alert app, have, and not in this case Bluetooth, but their GPS location on.
yeah, agreed. They would need to be told. So yeah, I just pose that as a question, something for us to think about. But what's the quickest way we can get to this without having to have another repository in our list? Something that we can just get out there quickly, and something that shows to people that we're sort of transparent and engaging communities, not just trying to do it all ourselves. I mean, there might even be businesses who want to take advantage of what we've done and create a business case on top of it, which is fine. But I think we all would be okay with that.
Yeah. But I was thinking for delivery, what if we made it? There's some security concerns with this, but what if we made it so that it's a propagating message, which means that it's sent to other computers who then send it on to other computers in the network, instead of like one single server who sends it out to a bajillion people, just like a network of connected computers that send it to each other. Is that a possibility?
But would there be any latency issues there?
Perhaps, because not everyone has reliable connections, and if one of them fails, then
yeah, because milliseconds matter here, so it would have to be latency would be an issue. But I like the idea, at least in terms of, I think someone once proposed a sort of what you're describing is I forget what the name of that. That's like Bitcoin. It's a like a universal ledger. But I like the idea that we could store it that way, so people can sort of account us for what we're doing. But the actual alert itself does need to be in the moment, ready for people to use.
Right.
Yeah, I think one of the things we can do here, right? So obviously we want to have a complete end-to-end system that does everything functionally, demonstrates the OpenEEW system as the base system. But I think to answer many of these other questions would be, okay, here's I'm not sure how familiar you are with Docker, right? So they used to have this tagline, like batteries included but swappable, right? So you have a working system out of the box with some sensible, base implementations, maybe some reference implementation. But then as you have different partners come in, say, listen, okay, here's our default alerter app code, whatever it is, system. It is known to have these characteristics. It's not for production use. But if you implement this API on either side of it, you can plug in your national CAPS broadcast system, whatever it is. I think, making it clear, hey, listen, here's the base code. Here's the places you can plug in, replace, or, adopt piecemeal maybe. Hopefully that way we kick over to other interested stakeholders to take on some of those non-functional things that we as an open source project or reference implementation for Puerto Rico can't necessarily do or don't have the capacity to do right now or the priority to do. I think that's really just the architectural question that's probably in there that makes the most sense to solve. And then that lets us come back to these questions later and have specific asks to organizations through CGI or universities or governments, whatever it may be.
From what do you know about CAPS? Is that is it like just a format, or is it a format in sort of like languages that we know, or is it like an infrastructure itself that's set up to handle alerting?
Yeah, so my understanding, so we had someone through the Call for Code program do a talk on it a couple of years ago. My understanding of it, maybe Andy, better, is CAP. So it's like Common Alerting Protocol, I think is what it is. It's an XML schema. So it defines and names all these things for, this is what the messages look like. This is what's broadcast over. Here's how you can parse it. What they were missing, as far as I understood, was kind of the client implementations to interpret and create those messages and also drive some more adoption of it. So on those two fronts, they were really looking to get more adoption. So it is a standard. It's an OASIS standard, but it still needed to increase its using. I know they do like a yearly conference and stuff like that. So there's definitely folks out there that using it, it's adopted, but I'm not sure how well it's pull into play. I don't know, Andy, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think you actually know more than I do about it.
So there's like a dedicated team that develops it or sort of champions it.
OASIS is the standards body. So they also manage things like, I think, web services, like the SOAP protocol. So that's where it gets its XML kind of heritage.
Yeah.
Is my understanding of it. Yeah. So, okay. So it's been adopted. I know, for example, they had a conference in Atlanta last year, stuff like that. Looks like there's a PHP library for it, stuff like that. But it's a standards body.
And you agree, Daniel, then it would make sense? I mean, given that it exists, why would we make up the format?
Yeah, and as you mentioned, there was somebody in the community, right, who's doing a lot of experiments. I'm sorry, I had a lot of experience with the Savannah project.
New one?
Yeah, Nuon. So he came on pretty early. He had lots of opinions. I think, it makes sense given that it is a standard. You don't want to reinvent the wheel, but if it is the kind of de facto thing out there, I think it makes sense to look at that as the starting point for messaging. But there may be other things that, for example, Shake Alert uses, Facebook prefers, things like that, right? So, I mean, maybe they can be our last mile person. I know they're on the board. I'm sorry, the TSC, the steering committee.
Yeah, we'll ask that question to Diego. I'm sure he'll have a lot of opinions about this through his work with Shake Alert. Okay. So how should we sort of structure the work, Daniel? Do you think in terms of the next, sort of lay it out? Should we be sort of revising the roadmaps that we created 2 months ago? And
exactly, yeah. So that's that. Before you joined, that was kind of one of the key topics I was hoping we'd cover, right? So looking at that roadmap, which we knew was regressive, that was focused at the CGIN kind of timeline. See, obviously, just to see what work that we now know needs to be included there. And I think split it out to kind of figure out who can help us in certain areas. And then kind of figure out a new schedule for that. And that takes into account, the work that needs to be done, how close we are to a device that we can ship, things like that. So I think the roadmap is key to that. I don't know if you want to take a first stab at that based on what you know now, if we're using Puerto Rico as kind of the primary driver of what we're doing.
Well, one question is, so should we have a master without getting complicated? But there's a sort of overall roadmap, but then there's going to be roadmaps for each of the work, for the dashboard, for the IoT stuff, for the detection stuff. So should we do a master roadmap and then sort of branch it off into individual repo roadmaps?
We could. I don't have a problem with that.
That to me seems pretty sensible, so that we, like, for example, us, the dashboard team, doesn't get confused by anything from the hardware team or the firmware team. So it's very clear for us what we need to do without it be having to be like being too vague for any sort of platform specifically. So like,
okay.
So we know exactly what we need to do. I think that would be better.
Well, if we're looking at Puerto Rico then as our sort of like immediate sort of goal, if we're using that as a platform to build this out, the MVP, let me just do a very, very rough draft, which I'm sure everyone will complain about. Let me just do an early draft, very, very straightforward, and I'll put it in the OpenEEW, the main repo that we've got, the first one, and then everybody please comment and shape it as necessary. And then from then, we can use that as a basis to form the other roadmaps in the individual repos. That makes, I don't know how to tie them together, but at least we can have something that we all work towards. Yeah. Okay. Well, I can have a stab. I'll just do a couple of activities there.
Right. Regarding the PR that was made on the dashboard, I haven't really had a chance. I know I was asked to take a look at it, but given my problems with booting it up and my laptop environment not being optimal right now, I hadn't really had a chance to really take a proper look at it. I'm also not entirely sure. I haven't really had the chance to read the thing either, so it might just be written down there and explicitly explained to me, and I'm just being dumb right now. But I'm not really sure exactly what it does and what I need to check. But I'll have to look at that later. But yeah, if it's too late, you don't have to wait for me. So that's good.
We can also cover that, on the dashboard meeting if we have specific stuff to talk about as far as the PR is concerned. It's getting larger and larger, and I have more stuff to add to it also that covers all the login, authentication, and everything. So probably end up either trying to break that up or or I don't know, or the part where you have to install or get connected to App ID to have the whole thing run is a little bit of a limitation. So I got to think about that in the next day or two to figure out how people can run this and test it without the setup that I have on my system. But we can do all that stuff on Friday. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So anything else? I mean, one of the things I wanted to say, because I know another question I have is just the way we structure our meetings. I really love the Friday meetings, by the way, because we have these dashboard meetings on Friday, which I think are always really focused and productive. Thanks to everyone here. I wonder sometimes when there's other issues that we want to deep dive into. Like I think all of the IoT stuff, led by John, really, I think is moving very quickly, and I don't know whether whenever we talk about it in this meeting, it's sort of, there's so much to talk about. I worry that people don't get to have, the overall view of everything. So I'm not sure. I don't want to create more meetings. That's not the point here. But I'm also aware that maybe there are maybe there need to be other discussions. John?
Yeah, I do like the idea of having a firmware sub-team and a provisioning sub-team. And now there's overlap, right? The firmware and the provisioning thing need to work together, and the provisioning and the user ID management system need to talk to each other. And so there's intersection points, and obviously the firmware and the infrastructure need to talk to each other. But there's a lot of cases where the provisioning app doesn't care about the infrastructure per se, right? There's a lot of things we can sort of segment the subgroups, the 5, 6 of us, 3 of us working on a particular area. We do a lot in the Slack channel, but it's nice to get together and talk at a much faster pace to solve a particular architecture decision. And then we have to write it down. We have to make sure that we capture the decision, we share it in the channel so that everyone else who wasn't available to participate understands, and we've got a record of what we decided to do. So let's, Andy or we could pick the 3 or 4, 5 different areas and set up subgroups. I think that's an excellent idea, a way to run the project.
Okay, and set subgroups, and then set potentially some dates for us to get together, and it can be bi-weekly potentially, or whatever it needs to be.
And then if we want to get a little bit more formal about it, each of those subgroups should report on our town hall meeting, so that way we're not racing at the end. Oh, we only have 3 minutes. You know what? Let's go talk about infrastructure. We can take the meeting agenda from the subgroups and say everyone's got 5 minutes to report a status.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Perfect.
Yeah, and I mean, from the stuff we talked about before about, I mean, I want to keep working on the dashboard, but I think there'll be some crossover with the dashboard and and whatever alerting system we come up with. So, I mean, I definitely volunteer to work on whatever team is going to look into CAP or whatever notification system that we end up developing there.
Right.
I
We should think about agile systems. How do we run as an agile team as well? Not everyone is, it's hard to do with an open source project, but when we're running a project that it's their day job, you sort of have a stand up in the morning and you decide what you want to work on and prioritize what the work is. What are your roadblocks? Who do you have dependencies on? Who do you need to work with through the day? And then share what lessons learned, the decisions made. And that way, every day you're kind of doing a quick 1 minute stand up of here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm working on, here's who I need help with, here's my problems. And that's, not that we need to do an everyday stand up. That might be too much. It's an open source project. And we've got lots of time zones, but we might want to think about how do we do an agile checkpoint. It doesn't have to be live. It could be we could have a Slack channel for that.
Yeah, because some of the issues with the dashboard, I mean, that lead into, I think, the project as a whole is that people come on and might say, oh, I want to work on this particular thing, but we have no understanding of what their time frame on it might be. And obviously you can't get, if it's an open source project, you can't get too specific, like, well, we need that by Wednesday. But some of those things also depend on, other sections of it. So we also need to get some sort of idea of like, okay, are you talking about doing this the next 3 months? Or are you talking about doing it, like Johnny does it in like 6 hours?
Right.
Yeah, well, I do have a lot of time.
But I don't know what sort of formal way of covering that is. I mean, it's a sort of an interesting kind of project management and open question.
Well, one of I follow this in Discord. There's a sort of open source community that I follow that are sort of developing some bizarre sort of battery related projects, and they have like variants of each project with subgroups, and each subgroup more or less does their own project management. There's no hierarchy there. I mean, they all are slightly chaotic, but within each subgroup they do things their own way. and maybe that's okay, you know, because they're different people used to working different ways, and they talk to each other more than the other people. So maybe we don't have to be too prescriptive, is what I mean.
Yeah,
If we want to be stand up in our group.
Yeah, and there's some I think there's some maybe some mentorship we can ask from the Linux Foundation, and there's also models we can look at, right? So Kubernetes is the big project. They do their scale is just massive. They've got these special interest groups, these subgroups, and we could study those models. And obviously there's overkill on some of them, but once you hit the scale, obviously they have to put them in place, those tools. But could be something we just ask, hey, listen, what's your recommendation? How should we move forward? What's your best practices at this maturity level of our project?
Perfect. Okay. Well, I'll shoot an email then to, I don't know if it's Todd or do you know someone else I could ask for advice?
Yeah, I'd start with Todd Benzies, and then see if he can recommend somebody. Maybe they can assign even a mentor. That was one thing we always were interested in bringing as well. Is there someone from the LF directly that has the full-time job responsibility to come in and help nurture some projects and see what they can do?
Perfect. For you to know, everybody, so the Linux Foundation wrote to us 2 days ago, just of an introduction to Washington State, who are trying to develop a sort of earthquake app, strangely, and somehow potentially tie it in with the Linux Foundation. So it was just an introduction, but the guy explained they're building an app, which I don't think is going to be OpenEEW related, unfortunately, because they're working with existing networks in the US. But there could be some overlap there, like if they're developing an open source app and we need to, something. So I'll let you know how that discussion goes and whether we can bring them into our community.
Great.
Okay.
You know what? There was, and this is something else just of interest. I think just in terms of growing the project, continuing to build on the Linux Foundation thing is we had a town hall earlier this week with the Project Owl folks, right? The Cluster Duck Protocol. They're also in the Linux Foundation. One of the things we talked about was they were doing a year in review on that call for the community, and thought it was a really good idea if we pulled together an infographic for them that basically says, hey, this is what we achieved in 2020. And then it's something that can be easily shared on social media, on LinkedIn, whatever it is. It says here, this is what we've done. We'd love you to be part of this. And it kind of goes into, I think, Andy, what we already did with the call through CGI. So maybe we can, all right, here's a great snapshot of the OpenEEW project. We'd love to get involved. Here are some ways to do it. And here are some gaps we have maybe that answer some of the questions we had on this call. And maybe that's just something that's announcing new features. Obviously, that's the case with OWL, what they want to do to drum up some more interest, but also, try to find new contributors, new points of view, things like that.
Yeah, great. So you like a one pager with a nice graphic?
Yeah. So if I just share my screen quickly, I literally just got the one from OWL that they sent over. Let me see. I mean, it's a work in progress, but this is kind of what they generate. Yeah, basically, okay, we launched a CDP in February, and sorry for the small text. It's, again, he's still working on it. But basically just say, hey, we added these features, we did these things, this was our version 2. And then what this doesn't have is kind of what's the call to action, kind of the next step. But anyway, this would be something also interesting to help, a one pager that the Linux Foundation, when they get contacted about projects, that they can quickly and easily just kind of mention about CDP. I'm sorry.
I'm already seeing our version of this as a seismic wave. But
I thought you were trying to avoid that motif. It's over again.
It's hard to get away from. Yeah.
Yeah, but we have a great new logo now, so we can go with that. But no, anyway, the point is, it's an awareness thing. Obviously, maybe it's not something we do immediately until we have some of these things ironed out, where if we had 20 people suddenly run to the project to easily get them integrated. But it would just be something interesting if you want a second bump from Linux Foundation, if you want a second bump from, even our marketing folks, social folks. This is, a potential way to go ahead and do it.
I think that's a great idea. Okay. That's a great idea. And I know that I often now, because I seem to be the contact person for our project with the Linux folks, I do occasionally field sort of interesting questions from people. That's how we got the Facebook inquiry and Zephyr, the folks who do the OS as well. So having something like that we can share would be really useful as well.
I haven't really heard of this Facebook inquiry. What is that about?
So Facebook, like IBM, contribute financially and in other ways towards Linux Foundation, and they, I don't know if, sorry, okay, I think inquiry is the wrong word. I inquired. I said, can we meet Facebook? And then they put us in touch because they've got a good open source community. So I thought we could get some people from their community somehow. So nothing has happened yet. We're just talking to one of the folks there.
Right.
But the point is that it's a good resource for us because there's a team of people there.
Sounds good.
Just making my to-do list. So the roadmaps and then the subgroups, the infographic. Okay, there's a few things there, and then we need to start really focusing it all on Puerto Rico.
Yeah, maybe on Friday when we get more in depth with the dashboard, we can kind of talk exactly about it. I mean, we have a general idea of what we want for a MVP with the dashboard, and are getting pretty close to it because now that the login is getting done, we're gonna start bringing that sensor data down, and then making more of the fleshing out the events page and whatnot. But we should really think about like what they would want out of the dashboard and see if there's any diversion from what we're going towards right now.
But who's they?
Puerto Rico.
Right. Yeah, good.
Probably I think before we get to the events side of it, we haven't done the device side of it. I think we should try to get the device management into the dashboard too.
Yeah, that's the next after the login. I want to do the login before the sensor portion of it, just because if it's live data, it should be behind some sort of authentication. Right. But yeah, our next big push is going to be devices, sensors, see how that all works out. And Kristen is working on some revisions to the devices sensors page that will allow a little bit more of the functionality that we talked about before the break, where you will be able to get the last bit of data from the sensor, or possibly like simulate an earthquake, or kind of the few things that she talked about. But she mentioned that you, John, and her had talked at some point, and she kind of knows what direction to go in.
Okay.
Hey Ryan, what you just said I thought was really interesting. I think we can treat Puerto Rico folks as a sort of end user to give us feedback on our development here, and and just maybe present it to them as a group at some point, and just try and ask them lots of questions. I think that could be really valuable instead of doing this all in isolation. Oh
yeah, definitely. I mean, anytime actual users that are the intended end users of a product start using the thing, I mean, you always find that, oh wait, they are finding certain things useful that we never even thought were going to be useful. So as soon as we can start using them as kind of a beta testing team, or whatever you want to call it, that'd be great.
Well, let me propose it to them, and maybe one of these meetings in the future, we'll invite one or two of them to be with us, and we can walk them through the dashboard and the system.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, I think we've hit the top of the hour. Anything else, guys?
Not yet, no. I'll if there's anything else, I'll post it in the. Yeah, I was gonna say the Discord, but it's not Discord; it's a Slack channel.
Okay. Well, thank you. Happy New Year again.
Happy New Year. Yeah.
We're going to do good stuff this year.
Yeah, hopefully. Although I don't think this year will be fantastic for me personally, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
All right, thanks everyone.
Awesome.
Thing I wanted to mention though